I stood in front of the mirror, stretching my arms lazily, completely carefree in my oversized t-shirt. The silence in the house was comforting, almost like a blanket of security. After all, my husband Sam was deaf. He couldn't hear a thing. That's why, for the past 6 months of our marriage, I had stopped caring about how I behaved at home. I hummed off-key, danced around ridiculously, and sometimes even walked around in just my underwear, knowing he wouldn't hear me giggle or whisper to myself. There were no secrets between us because, in my mind, there was nothing he could hear. But that night, something felt different. I had just gotten out of the shower, towel drying my hair, when I suddenly caught a glimpse of Sam in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. I smiled to myself and decided to test something out. "Sam, if you can hear me, touch your nose." I snickered at my own silliness. Of course, he wouldn't react. This was a game I sometimes played, talking to him as if he could hear me, knowing I could say anything without consequences. But then, my breath caught in my throat. Sam's hand moved, casually, almost too naturally. He touched his nose. My body stiffened. My heart slammed against my ribs. No, that was a coincidence. It had to be. A cold shiver ran down my spine as a horrifying thought took root in my mind. Had he been hearing everything? Every private conversation, every whispered rant, every moment, when I thought I could say anything without consequence. I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling as I clutched the towel around me. If this was real, if Sam could actually hear, then my entire marriage had been built on a lie, and I had no idea what he had heard. I met Sam 3 years ago at a mutual friend's art exhibition. He was unlike any man I had ever encountered. Tall, composed, and with a quiet confidence that drew people in despite his silence. At first, I didn't even realize he was deaf. He responded to conversations by reading lips, nodded at jokes at the perfect moments, and his eyes, were so expressive that words felt unnecessary. When I learned about his condition, it didn't change anything for me. If anything, it made him even more intriguing. The way he navigated the world with such independence and grace left me in awe. Communication was never a problem. He had a way of making me understand everything he wanted to say, whether through texts, facial expressions, or the occasional sign language. Our relationship moved fast. Within a year, we were engaged, and 6 months later, I became Monica Carson, his wife. At first, marriage was everything I had imagined: peaceful, loving, and filled with quiet moments of understanding. Sam was the perfect husband. He was kind, attentive, and never once lost his temper. There were no unnecessary arguments, no loud fights. If I wanted to rant, I did. After all, he couldn't hear me. That became the comfort of our marriage. A strange kind of security. I never had to filter my words around him because I believed he wouldn't hear me anyway. If I was frustrated with my day, I'd vent freely. If I was feeling silly, I'd talk to myself in the kitchen while cooking. And sometimes, I'd say things I never should have. Things like, "I swear if Sam wasn't so ridiculously handsome, I wouldn't have married him this fast." Ugh, I wish he could hear for just 1 second so I could yell at him properly when he forgets to put his socks away. I mean, I love him, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have a husband I could just talk to normally. They weren't meant to be cruel, just thoughts, words spoken into the void. And then there was the way I carried myself at home. Got used to the idea that Sam couldn't hear footsteps, conversations, or even the sound of fabric shifting. It made me a little reckless. If I didn't feel like putting on proper clothes after a shower, I wouldn't. If I wanted to sing badly at the top of my lungs while wearing just a towel, I did. It was like living in my own little world, where privacy wasn't an issue. Sam never reacted, never looked surprised, never flinched. So I never suspected a thing, until that night. Until I saw him touch his nose after I jokingly told him to. I sat frozen on the edge of our bed, staring at the Man I thought I knew. A man who had never, not once, given me a reason to believe he could hear a single thing. And yet, doubt clawed at my mind now. Had I been wrong all along? Had Sam been silently listening to everything I had ever said? The thought made my stomach churn. But if it was true, then the real question wasn't just how he had hidden it, it was why. I couldn't sleep that night. My body lay still under the covers, but my mind was a storm. The memory of Sam touching his nose after I had jokingly, told him to kept replaying in my head, coincidence, or something more sinister? I turned my head slightly to look at Sam. He was lying beside me, his breathing slow and steady, eyes closed as if he was in deep sleep. But was it all an act? Had everything been an act? A part of me wanted to shake him awake and demand answers. But how do you even ask your husband, "Hey, have you been secretly hearing me this whole time?" Instead, I needed proof. Over the next few days, I started testing him. First, I dropped a book on the floor. Nothing. He didn't even flinch. Then I whispered his name from across the room. No reaction. I even clapped my hands behind his back. Still, nothing. Each time I told myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me, that Sam was really as deaf as I had always believed. But the doubt never faded. Until one morning when I caught him, I had just finished making coffee and was sitting at the dining table scrolling through my phone when I decided to do one final test. "Sam, if you can hear me, lift your right hand." I watched him closely. Nothing. "Sam, if you can actually hear, scratch the back of your head." Again, nothing. He remained seated on the couch, reading a book like always. My shoulders sagged in relief. Maybe I really had imagined everything. But then, a few minutes later, just when he thought I wasn't paying attention, he reached up and scratched the back of his head. My entire body turned cold. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't obvious. But it was too perfectly timed to be a coincidence. Blood pounded in my ears as I set my coffee down and stared at him. He could hear. And if he could hear, then that meant he had heard everything. The careless words I had spoken, the things I had complained about. Every single time I thought I was talking into thin air, my hands clenched into fists. Why would he lie? Why would he let me believe he was deaf when he wasn't? Was this some kind of sick joke? A test? A game? I couldn't hold it in anymore. I had to confront him. I stood up, walked straight to the couch, and took a deep breath before blurting out, "Sam, can you hear me?" His eyes flicked up from his book, meeting mine with calm indifference. He tilted his head slightly as if confused, then reached for his phone and began typing. I snatched it from his hands before he could finish. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "No more texts. No more pretending. I need to know the truth, Sam. Can you hear me?" He didn't respond. I took a step closer. "I know what I saw." My voice cracked. "I've seen the way you react. You flinched when I dropped something. You touched your nose when I told you to. And just now you scratched your head when I said it out loud. You can hear, can't you?" His jaw tightened, but still, he didn't answer. Tears pricked the back of my eyes. This was betrayal. I had trusted him. I had built my life around the idea that he was deaf, and now I didn't even know who I had married. "Say something," I choked out, my voice breaking. "Please, Sam, just tell me the truth." A long silence stretched between us before he finally moved. He sighed, closed his book, and slowly lifted his gaze to mine. Then, in a deep, steady voice, the first time I had ever heard his voice, he spoke. "Monica, I can hear you." My entire body went numb. I had imagined this moment so many times, wondered what his voice might sound like if, by some miracle, he could speak to me one day. But not like this. Not under these circumstances. I stumbled back as the weight of his words crashed over me. He could hear everything. A million thoughts stormed through my head all at once. How long had he been hiding this? Why would he lie? Was our entire marriage a game to him? I felt sick. My legs wobbled as I tried to process it all. What had I said in all these months, thinking he couldn't hear me? And then, like a nightmare unfolding, the memories came rushing in. I swear if Sam wasn't so ridiculously handsome, I wouldn't have married him this fast. I mean, I love him, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have a husband I could just talk to normally. God, I could say anything in this house, and he wouldn't even know. My stomach churned violently. Did he hear all of that? I lifted my gaze to Sam. He was watching me, his face unreadable. No anger. No regret. Just calm. As if this was just another normal conversation between us. I, on the other hand, felt like my entire reality had just shattered. My voice trembled. You lied to me. Sam inhaled deeply. I never lied. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, so you just conveniently forgot to mention that you could hear? His eyes darkened. It's not that simple, Monica. Not that simple? My breath hitched. You let me believe you were deaf. You let me talk to you, thinking you couldn't hear me. You let me walk around this house? My voice caught in my throat. I couldn't even finish that sentence. Turned away, hugging myself. My mind was spiraling. Had I ever done something truly embarrassing? Had I ever said something cruel? Had I ever... Tears burned my eyes as I squeezed them shut. You heard everything, didn't you? Sam was silent, and his silence told me everything I needed to know. I whipped back around, my chest heaving. How long, Sam? I demanded. How long have you been able to hear me? He hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. I shook my head in disbelief. The entire time, wasn't it? His jaw clenched. Monica, no! I cut him off, my voice shaking. No excuses. I need to know why. Why would you do this to me? He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Because I was afraid. Afraid? I let out a hollow laugh. Afraid of what? He met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Guilt. That you wouldn't love me the same way. His voice was low, almost pained. That if you knew I could hear, you'd treat me differently. That you'd start filtering yourself around me. I didn't want that, Monica. I stared at him in shock. So you just let me embarrass myself? Let me spill my thoughts, my secrets, my frustrations, knowing you could hear every single word? He swallowed hard. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought if I told you later when the time was right. I let out a shaky breath, feeling like I might collapse. And when exactly was that, Sam? After a year? After 5 years? Or were you just planning on never telling me? He opened his mouth but hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. A sharp pain twisted in my chest. I didn't know this man at all. I had loved Sam. I had trusted him. And now, all I could feel was betrayal. I stepped back, my voice barely a whisper. I don't even know who I married. His expression turned desperate. Monica, please! I shook my head, my vision blurred with tears. I couldn't do this. Not right now. So I turned around and walked away. Because if I stayed any longer, I wasn't sure if I would scream, cry, or completely fall apart. I locked myself in the guest bedroom, my back pressed against the door, heart pounding so loud I could barely think. Sam had been lying to me this whole time, every whispered secret. Every careless remark, every single moment I thought I was safe. He had heard it all. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I needed space. I needed time to breathe, to process. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't sit right. Sam had claimed he was afraid I'd treat him differently if I knew he could hear. But that wasn't enough. That wasn't the whole truth. There had to be something more. A sudden thought struck me. Had anyone else known? My fingers trembled as I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was only one person who might have answers. Jack. Jack was Sam's best friend. He had known him for years, even before I came into the picture. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. I hit call. After 3 rings, Jack's voice came through. "Monica?" I gripped the phone tightly. "Jack, I need you to tell me the truth. About Sam." A pause. Then, "What are you talking about?" I took a shaky breath. "He can hear." Silence. And in that silence, I got my answer. My stomach dropped. "You knew." Jack exhaled sharply. "Monica, listen." Oh my God. My free hand pressed against my forehead as a wave of nausea hit me. "How long?" He hesitated, and I could almost hear him debating whether to tell me the truth. "Since the accident," he finally said. I froze. "What accident?" Jack sighed. 3 months before your wedding, Sam had surgery. It was experimental, and the doctors weren't sure if it would work, but it did. He regained his hearing. I couldn't breathe. 3 months before our wedding, he had been able to hear me that whole time? And he still let me marry him without telling me? My hands shook. "Why didn't he tell me?" Jack hesitated. "Because he thought you'd leave him." I let out a bitter laugh. "Are you serious?" "He was scared, Monica," Jack said, his voice firm. "He thought you loved him because of his vulnerability, because you saw him as someone who needed you. He thought that if you knew he could hear, you might not love him the same way." I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to make sense of it all. Had Sam really thought so little of me? Had he really believed my love for him was conditional? Jack's voice softened. "Monica, he loves you. He never planned to keep this from you forever. He just didn't know how to tell you without losing you." I clenched my jaw. "Well, congratulations. He lost me anyway." I hung up before Jack could say another word. Then, with my heart pounding and anger boiling inside me, I stormed out of the guest room. I had so many questions, and Sam was going to give me answers. I stormed into the living room, my pulse hammering. Sam was still sitting on the couch, hands clasped together, as if he had been waiting for me. His face was unreadable, but his shoulders were tense. He knew this moment was coming. I stopped a few feet away, my voice sharp and unwavering. "When? Were you planning to tell me?" Sam's jaw clenched. He exhaled slowly before meeting my gaze. "I don't know." A bitter laugh escaped me. "You don't know? That's the best you can come up with?" I took a step closer, fury and betrayal swirling inside me. "Jack told me everything." His fingers twitched. "Monica?" "No." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "You got your hearing back 3 months before our wedding. You had plenty of time to tell me. But you didn't. Instead, you let me believe you were still deaf. You let me make a fool of myself." His face tightened, but he said nothing. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. "Was this a game to you? Some kind of test? Were you just waiting to see how much of an idiot I could be before you finally revealed the truth?" His head snapped up, eyes flashing. "No." "Then why?" My voice cracked. "Why did you do this to me?" He let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair. "Because I was scared." I scoffed. "Scared of what, Sam? Scared of being honest with your wife?" His eyes darkened. "Scared of losing you." I froze. His voice was steady, but there was a rawness to it that sent chills down my spine. "Do you know what people said when we got together, Monica? That you were only with me because I was deaf. That you liked playing the role of the perfect wife to a man who needed you. That if I could hear, if I was just like everyone else, you wouldn't have loved me the same way." His words hit like a slap. "That's ridiculous," I snapped. "I married you because I love you, not because of—" "But you changed," he interrupted, his voice softer now. "The moment you thought I couldn't hear, you changed. You spoke freely. You did things you'd never have done otherwise. You told me everything. But only because you thought I wouldn't hear it." I opened my mouth to argue, but his words sent ice down my spine. He was right. I had changed. Not in the way he thought, not because I loved him any less, but because I had believed he couldn't hear me. Because I had thought my words had no consequences. I swallowed hard. That doesn't justify lying to me. His face twisted with regret. I know. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then I whispered the question that had been haunting me since I first realized the truth. Did I say something that made you doubt me? Sam's throat bobbed, but he didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation, it shattered something inside me. Tears welled up in my eyes. You did, didn't you? He exhaled sharply. It wasn't just one thing, Monica. It was small things. Comments about how you wished I could hear you. Jokes about how easy it was to say whatever you wanted. Moments where I wondered if maybe, deep down, you'd wished I was different. Tears burned at my eyes. I never meant those things. I know, he said softly, and that's why I stayed quiet. I didn't want to ruin what we had. I told myself it didn't matter. That as long as I loved you, as long as I gave you the life you deserved, it would be enough. But it wasn't enough, I whispered. He closed his eyes briefly. No, it wasn't. I shook my head, wiping my tears. So, where does that leave us? His voice was hoarse when he answered. I don't know. Neither did I, because, as much as I loved Sam, I didn't know if I could forgive him. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating. Sam sat there watching me, waiting. For what? For me to forgive him? For me to scream at him? For me to leave? I didn't know. Wiped my damp cheeks, forcing myself to breathe. Did I still love him? Yes. Could I trust him? I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. This wasn't something we could fix in one conversation. I crossed my arms over my chest. I need time, Sam. His expression twisted, but he nodded. I understand. No, you don't. My voice was raw. Because if you did, you wouldn't have done this to me. He inhaled deeply, then stood up. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. He was always so confident, so in control, but now, he looked afraid. Afraid of losing. Me. And despite the anger, despite the betrayal, that sight hurt. I turned away, walking toward the bedroom. I'm going to stay at Sam Reen's for a few days. He tensed. Monica! I'm not leaving you, I said quickly, swallowing hard. But I can't be here right now. His shoulders sagged, relief and pain flickering across his face all at once. Okay, I grabbed my bag, stuffing in whatever I could, my mind spinning. What was I supposed to do now? Could we ever go back to the way things were? When I turned to leave, he suddenly spoke. Monica, wait. I hesitated but didn't turn around. His voice was soft but steady. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And if I could take it back, I would. But I don't want to lose you. I squeezed my eyes shut. Why did he have to say things like that? Why did he have to make it harder? I swallowed the lump in my throat. I don't want to lose you either, Sam. And then I walked out the door. 3 weeks later, time apart was strange. At first, I thought I'd feel free, like I could finally clear my head without the weight of everything pressing down on me. But instead, I felt hollow. Like something was missing. Like someone was missing. Sam tried to respect my space, but I knew he was struggling. I saw it in his texts, short but careful. Hope you're doing okay. Take your time, I'm here. I miss you. And even though I wasn't ready to come back, I missed him too. Then, one night, Jack called. Hey, he said, I think you should come home. I stiffened. What happened? He's a mess, Monica. Jack sighed. I've never seen him like this before. He's not eating properly, barely sleeping. I think he's scared that if he gives you too much space, you'll never come back. I gripped my phone tighter. I don't know if I can trust him again. Jack was silent for a moment. Then he said something that stuck with me. Sam messed up, yeah, but he didn't lie to hurt you. He lied because he was afraid of losing you. And now, he's afraid of the same thing. I swallowed hard. Jack let out a dry laugh. Look, I'm not saying you should just forgive him overnight, but if you still love him, then don't let this be the thing that breaks you. The call ended, but my thoughts didn't. I sat there staring at my suitcase. What was I waiting for? If I still loved him, why was I keeping myself away? I grabbed my bag and walked out. When I stepped into the house, it felt different. Quieter. I saw him before he saw me. He was in the kitchen, back turned, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well, like he had been waiting. My heart clenched. Taking a deep breath, I spoke. Hey. He stiffened. Then slowly he turned. For a second, he just stared. His eyes flickered with shock, then hope. Then hesitation, like he wasn't sure if I was back for good. I bit my lip. Can we talk? His Adam's apple bobbed. Yeah, of course. We sat in the living room, neither of us speaking right away. It felt like there were 1,000 words to say, but neither of us knew where to start. So, I started with the truth. I'm still hurt, Sam, I admitted. And I don't know how long it'll take for me to trust you again. He nodded, his hands clasped together tightly. I understand. But I don't want to end us, I continued, because despite everything, I still love you. His breath hitched. You do? I let out a weak laugh. Yeah, idiot. I do. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. It was small, hesitant, but real. I love you too, he said, his voice almost breaking. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I stared at him, searching for any trace of dishonesty. There was none. And just like that, I realized something. Love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about never messing up. It was about choosing each other. Even when it was hard, I wasn't ready to forget, but I was willing to try. And for now, that was enough.